Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Steamgoolie, the long-lost undead steampunk brother of legendary horror host Steamgoolie. So that day came to me in a dream one morning. I always seem to dream in the morning, never at night. And I decided to run with it. On this auspicious day, 184 years ago, the legendary Edgar Allan Poe, who had served in the military, hence I salute Evans, had published this story, The Masque of Red Death. A story that I find a bit elegantly lurid, and so I've decided, in honor of Poe and the publication date, I will read it to you here tonight. Please enjoy. The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal. The redness and the horror of blood. For sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and profuse bleeding at the pores, with disillusion. The scarlet stains upon the body and especially upon the face of the victims, with the pest ban from which shut him out from the aid and the sympathy of his fellow men, and the whole season of progress and termination of the disease with incidents of a half hour. But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were heavily populated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from all among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his castle alleys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, creating of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A strong and lofty wall girdled it in. The wall had gates of iron. The courtiers, having entered, brought furnaces and massy hammers and welded the bolts. This resolve to leave means neither of ingress nor egress to the sudden impulses of despair or frenzy from within. The abbey was amply provisioned. With such precaution, the courtiers might bid defiance to stagnation. The external world would take care of itself. Meantime, it was far too grievous to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisatory, there were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there was beauty, there was wine. And all these were secured in. Without was the Red Death. It was toward the 5th of the 6 months of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged most furiously abroad, the Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a masked ball for the most unusual magnificent. It was a voluptuous scene, that masquerade. But first let me tell of the rooms in which it was held. There was seven, an imperial suite. In many palaces, however, such suites form a long and straight vista, while the folding doors slide back nearly to the walls on either hand, so the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here the case was very different. It might have been expected from the Duke's love of the bizarre. The apartments were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced but little more than one at a time. There was a soft turn every 20 or 30 yards, and at each novel effect. To the right and left, in the middle of each wall, a tall, narrow Gothic window looked out upon a closed corridor which pursued the windings of the suite. These windows were of stained glass whose color varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber into which it opened. At that eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue, and vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple in its ornaments and tapestries, and here were panes of purple. The third was green throughout, and so were the casements. The fourth was finished in light with orange. The fifth with white, and sixth with violet. The seventh apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung all over from the ceiling down the walls, falling in heavy folds upon a carpet of that same material and hue. But in this chamber only, the color of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. Panes here were scarlet, a deep blood color. Now, in no one of these 7 apartments was there any lamp or candelabra room. Amid the profusion of gold ornaments that lay scattered to and fro dependent from the roof, there was no light of any kind emanating from lamp or candle within the suite of chambers. But in the corridors that followed each suite, there stood, opposite to each window, a heavy tripod, bearing a brazier of light that projected its rays through the tinted glass and so glaringly illuminate the room. And thus were produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic experiences. But in the western or black chamber, in the light that streamed down upon the hangings through the blood-tinted panes was ghastly in the extreme, and produced so wildly a look upon the countenances of those who entered. There were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its precincts at all. It was in this apartment also that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang. When the minute hand made the circuit of the face, and the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen lungs of the clock a sound which was clear and loud and deep and exceedingly musical, but of so peculiar a note and emphasis that, at each lapse of an hour, the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause momentarily in their performance to hearken to the sound. Thus the waltzers performed ceased their evolutions, and there was a brief concert of the whole gay company, and while the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed that the giddiest grew pale, and the more aged and sedate passed their hands over their brows as confused in reverie or meditation. But when the echoes had fully passed, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled as if their own nervousness had folly, and made whispering vows, each to the other, next time the clock should produce in them no similar emotion. And then, after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embraced 3,600 seconds that time flies, there came yet another chiming of the clock, and then the same disconcert and tremulousness meditation as before. But in spite of these things, it was a happy and magnificent revel. The taste of the Duke was peculiar. He had a fine eye for colors and effects. His disregard for the decor of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery, and his conceptions glowed barbaric luster. There was someone who thought him mad. His followers felt he was not. It was necessary to hear and see and touch him to be sure he was not. He had directed, in great part, the movable embellishments of the 7 chambers upon the occasion of the great fete, and it was his own guiding taste which had given character to the masqueraders. We saw they were grotesque. There were much glare and glitter and piquancy and phantasm. Much of what has been seen in Hernani. There was arabesque figures with unusual limbs and appointments. There were delirious fancies such as the madman fashions. There was much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, not a little of that which might have excited disgust. To and fro in the 7 chambers then there stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams, and these, the dreams, arrived in and about, taking you from the rooms and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as if the echo their step. And anon there strikes the ebony clock which stands in the hall of velvet, and then for a moment all is still, and all is silent, save for the voice of the clock. Dreams are stiff frozen as they stand. The echoes of the chime die away. They have endured but an instant. The light, half-subdued laughter floats from them after they depart. And now again the music swells and the dreams live and drive to and fro more merrily than ever, taking you from the many tinted windows through which stream the rays from the tripods. but to the chamber which lies most westly of the seven. There are now none of the maskers who ventured, for the night is waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-colored panes. The blackness of the sable drapery appalls, and to him whose foot stalks upon the sable carpet comes from the near clock ebony a muffled peal more solemnly and emphatic than which reaches their ears who indulge in the more remote gaieties of the other apartments. But these other apartments were densely crowded, and in them beat feverishly the heart of life, and their bell went whirlingly on until at length they commenced the sounding of midnight upon the clock. And then the music ceased, as I have told, and the evolutions of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all things as before. But now there were 12 strokes to be crowned by the bell of the clock, and thus it happened, perhaps, that more of thought crept, more of time into the meditations of the thoughtful among those who reveled. And thus too it happened, perhaps, the last echoes of the chime had suddenly sunk into silence. There were many individuals in the crowd who found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure which had directed the attention of no single individual before, and the rumor of this new presence had spread itself whispering around. There arose at length from the whole company a buzz, or murmur, expressive of disapprobation and surprise, and then, finally, of terror, of horror, and disgust. In an assembly of phantasms such as I have painted, it may well be supposed that no ordinary appearance could have excited such sensation. In truth, the masquerade lessons of the night was nearly unlimited, but the figure in question had out-Heroded Herod, and gone beyond the bounds of even the prince's indefinite decorum. There are chords in the hearts of the most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion. Even the utterly lost, to whom life and death are equally just, there are matters of which no jest can be made. The whole company, indeed, seemed now deeply to feel that the costume and the bearing of the stranger neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt, shrouded from head to foot in the habiliments of the grave. Masque which could conceal the visage was made so near that it resembled the countenance of a stiffened corpse. The closest scrutiny must have had difficulty in detecting the cheat. Indeed, all this might have endured, if not approved, by the mad Ravel's brow. But the mummer had gone so far as to assume the type of death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of the face, was besprinkled with the scarlet horror. When the eyes of Prince Prospero fell upon the spectral image, which with a slow and solemn movement, as if to fold the stain its roulette, stalked to and fro among the waltzers, he seemed to be convulsed in the first moment with a strong shudder either of terror or distaste, but next his brow reddened with rage. "Who dares?" he demanded hoarsely for the courtiers who stood next to him. "Who dares to insult us with his blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him. We may know who we have strung sunrise from the battlements." It was the instant or blue chamber in which stood the Prince Prospero as he uttered these words. They rang throughout the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand. It was in the blue room where stood the prince with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of this group in the direction of the intruder, who at the moment was also near at hand, and now, with deliberate and stately step, made closer approach the speaker. But from a certain nameless awe with which the mad assumptions of the moment had inspired the whole party, there were none found who put forth hand to seize him, so that unimpeded he passed within a yard of the prince's person, and while the vast assembly As if with one impulse, sprang from the censers of the room to the wall, he made his way uninterruptedly with the same solemn, measured step which had distinguished him from the first, through the blue chamber to the purple, through the purple to the green, through green to the orange, through this again to the white, and thence even to the violet, ere a decided movement had made to arrest him. It was then, however, the Prince Prospero, melting with rage at the same of his own cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him on account of the deadly terror that had seized upon all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger, and had approached in rapid impetuosity, to within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure, when the latter, having obtained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turned suddenly and confronted his pursuer. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped gleaming upon the sable carpet, upon which instantly afterwards fell prostrate in death Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, throng of all the revelers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and seizing the moment where his tall figure stood erect motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror, finding the grave cerements, the corpse-like mask which they had handled with so violent rudeness, untintelated by any tangible form. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. It had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revelers, blood-bedewed halls of the revel, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall. In life the ebony clock went out without one last of the day, and the flames of the tripods expired, and darkness, decay, Red Death had inimitable dominion over all. And so there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, Masque of Red Death. I hope you've enjoyed. If you dig what I'm doing, please consider subscribing. I'll also back. Fare thee well.